Northampton Üniversitesi öğretim üyesi Doktor Glenn RIKOWSKI'ye eleştirel pedagoji üzerine düşüncelerini ve aforizmalarını paylaşmak üzere sözü bırakmadan önce oturum başkanı Doktor Seda Baysal Doğruluğu davet ediyorum. Before inviting Dr. Glenn RIKOWSKI from Northampton University to share his thoughts and aphorisms on critical pedagogy, I would like to invite session chair Dr. Seda Baysal Doğruluk.
Herkese tekrar merhabalar. Glenn, hello. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yes, I can.
Okay. Is it possible to open your camera?
Is it possible? Blah, blah, blah, blah, blah. Is that it?
Okay. Hello. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
First of all, welcome to our conference on Second International Educational Sciences and Effective Practices Conference. Really, it's an honor to see you with us, and thanks for accepting our invitation. Time to time, I will make some translations for our participants. Is it okay for you?
Yeah, that's fine. I can't.
Okay.
So.
I will not interrupt you because you don't want to translate all your talk, your presentation. But after your presentation, we will summarize. Okay, make a short summary about your presentation and what you have talked about. Is it okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Sevgili katılımcılarımız, Glenn RIKOWSKI, Dr. Glenn RIKOWSKI, Northampton Üniversitesi İngiltere'den katılım sağlıyor. Konusu Aphorisms on Critical Pedagogy, eleştirel pedagoji üzerine aforizmalar konulu bir sunum gerçekleştirecek. Şimdi sözü kendisine bırakacağız. Hocamız sunumunu yaptıktan sonra ve ara ara gerekli noktalarda çeviriler yapacağız ve sunum sonrasında sorularınız olursa hocamıza ileteceğiz. Okay, Glenn, if you're ready, we can start. Would you like to share your file, your document with us?
I don't have a document.
Okay.
What I've done.
I think
what I've done is I produced a 7,000 word paper.
Yeah.
Specifically for this conference, which is on academia and on research.
Yeah, you send it to us.
There's
okay.
no PowerPoint.
Yeah.
I've given up PowerPoint. I don't do that anymore.
Okay, we really appreciate it to listen to you, okay? Mm-hmm. And your time will be about 30 minutes?
That's good, yeah.
Okay. Good. Esir Hocam, would you like to tell something?
Yeah, first I really thank him a lot for accepting our invitation. It's good, but he already told us that he's gonna speak like spontaneously, and he already has a manuscript. But I think like he's gonna speak it like naturally, maybe based on his article or the work. Actually, that's really good. I really thank him a lot, actually, for accepting our invitation. That's really good.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. To the conference. It is not just an honor for you; it's an honor for me as well to speak at such a conference. As I said, I've written a paper which you can find on academia and on ResearchGate too. The paper is really a warning. It's a warning about what could happen. What could happen if capital is let loose in education. So it's not a critique of critical pedagogy, because that's already being done by the post-critical pedagogy people, such as Joris Vliga, Naomi Hodgson, and Piotr Zamodzki. They're doing that along with their colleagues. It's not an idealist or trans-historical, instrumental or analytical critique. It's not a philosophical critique. Rather, it is a critique of pedagogy in its historically capitalist form. It's a critique of specifically capitalist pedagogy. And this is undertaken through Marxist science. Okay, so what it is basically is a philosophical philosophy of intellectual attack on capital and its social forms, and indeed the capital relation itself. It looks at, tries to focus on the fragility of capitalist rule, its weakest points, and it's not, I wouldn't say it's opposed, but it's very, very different from a social justice-based critical pedagogy or a trans-historical idealist conception of what pedagogy ought to be. Maybe just briefly trying to outline what I'm trying to do. Friesen and Kenckley's two writers on pedagogy, for example, they talk about the pedagogical relation is a relation between the educator and the educand, and the world is the third bit to it. So the pedagogical relation is like a triangular form between the educator, the educand, and the world. What I've done, I've substituted the capital relation for the world. So for me, the pedagogical relation is about the relation between teachers and students and the value form of labor and labor power. So that's how I see the pedagogical relation. Now, Marx noted that in Theories of Surplus Value, part 1, that there's two types of commodities in the world. There's the general class of commodities and there is labor power. The magical quality of labor power is that it's the only commodity in the capitalist social universe that actually increases, creates more value than is used up in its workings. So labor power can create new value and surplus value, whereas machinery, what happens with the value that's already created in machinery and dead labor, including AI and all this fancy stuff, that is transferred bit by bit, but doesn't create any new additional value. Now, some people might say that this is the kind of reductionism, that I'm just reducing everything to the economic. But I have some answers to that in the paper, which I'm not going to go over here. There's a section on reductionism. Now, in part 3 of the paper, I'm moving on pretty quickly here. In part 3 of the paper, the focus is on labor power, the commodity, the first commodity form referred to by Marx in Theories of Surplus Value. And the context is that on how labor is produced in schools and universities. Labor power is the capacity to labor, and that capacity to labor in the labor process, in the work situation, is transformed into two things. One is a useful thing, a use value, and the other is value itself. Value is the substance of capital. There's not two types of labor going on. There's only one type of labor. They express themselves in two different ways. But labor power is a unique and special commodity owned by the laborers. It's the only commodity that can create more value than it uses up when put to work in the capitalist labor process. And it's the basis of capitalist society. Marx says that the whole system of capitalist production is based on the fact that the workman sells his labor power as a commodity. Capitalism is based on us selling our labor power as a commodity. our labour power is expressed in different ways, and in past work you can find the 6 main ways that I've located in terms of how labour power is expressed. But one important way, or perhaps the most important way of these 6, is what I've called the subjective aspect of labour power. You see, the thing is, although labour power is the most precious and wonderful and magical commodity, it exists in the bodiliness of the worker. It exists in our bodies. That's a big problem for capital. Just imagine if you're a representative of capital, you're a manager, you're a CEO, you're a training officer, or whatever. You've got to cajole and incentivize and persuade people to give up their labor power. Of course, the whole thing is made simpler by the fact that labourers don't own the means of production. So to that extent, they're forced to give their labour power to capital. Now, I've called the social production of labour power all those institutions and organisations that go into socially producing labour power. Marx is quite clear in Theories of Surplus Value, looking at the work of Adam Smith, that education produces labour power. He says that. Okay, now I take that seriously. A lot of people don't, but I personally do. And what I see is that there's a whole social production of labour power going on. Many years ago, I had a friend, Jimmy Dempsey, who was a trade union leader in Coventry while I was doing my research, and he said, "Glenn, I'll take you on an adventure. I'll take you round various institutions in Coventry in the local context." And I said, okay, fair enough. So I did that. He took me to a primary school where he is he was a school governor. He's probably dead by now. He's a lot older than me. He took me to a primary school, a secondary school. He took me to a community organisation. He took me to a training workshop for the unemployed youth, which amazingly later on I was working in that place, which was just one of these weird things in life. But what I could see that all these fragmented institutions were involved in some way, to some extent, with the social production of labour power in capitalism. Now, it's a very weak productive form, partly because it's split up into all of these organisations and institutions, which makes it difficult to study, which is why no one has actually studied it empirically. No one's actually, to my knowledge, no one's done it except this guy. This guy has done it. Riccardo Ciccarelli, Italian guy, and he's looked at the production of labour power in terms of digital production. He's looked at how people are trained, educated, and organised by management and so on in terms of the digital world. Now, that's a fantastic book. So people are at last doing something in this field. I'm moving on several bits of my paper now. I'm just cutting big chunks out. One of the implications of what I'm saying is that in terms of labour power values, our own labour power values, one result is that they have different values. So the social production of labour power in capitalism leads to people having labour powers of different values, which in capitalist terms give them different social worth. In capitalist terms, some people are just worth more than others, and they get paid more, and they get promotions, and so on and so on. I've tried to explain in an article some years ago why it is that women in general, on average, are paid less than men. And it's all to do with the form that social worth takes in our society. So I argue we need to be against our social worth. We need to be against that. That's just by and by. And now coming on to teachers, teachers, in terms of what I'm saying, have a really strange position. With the general class of commodities like bricks and cars and so on, the means of production are dead labor. They are machines, they are computer programs, they're computers, they are metal, and so on and so on. But with labor power, this special commodity, the whole game changes. It's different. No one has pointed this out before. Teachers are means of production. They are living means of production. No one has made this point before. And from that point, several things flow. Unlike, I know people talk about AI and stuff talking to us, and I have Alexa talking to me and so on and so on, but they're dead. They are not living things. Teachers are living humans, and they are means of production. Now, obviously, if that is the case, then that is very problematic. So the central difference between producing examples of the general class of commodities and socially producing labor power is the fact that teachers are living at means of production, and on the same level as computers, libraries, desks, books, educational toys, in nursery environments, for example, and so on. And what we've seen is the gradual mechanization of teaching and learning. Computer and IT stuff is becoming humanized, and teachers and students are becoming mechanized. There's the two movements going on. However, here's the good bit. Teachers do have a certain type of social power. The social power of teachers rests on the fact they're central to the shaping and enhancement of the single unique commodity that is foundational to the existence, intensity, and development of capital. They are labor power. They produce this magical commodity. They are involved in its production. That gives them social power, which sometimes they seem to be unaware of or want to deny. They're like guardians of the flame, shepherds of the social energy that expresses itself as labor in capitalist labor process and produces value and surplus value. Angels of fuel dump. They are alchemists of the living stone. I've used all these metaphorical ways of trying to get across of the real social power that teachers have. Now, because they have that power, in a basic way, the capitalist state and representatives of capital, they do kind of know this, all right? So what do you have to do? You have to regulate teachers' labor. And you have to do that in a number of ways. Not just teachers' labor, but teacher training, and the way that teachers go about their professional lives. Now, turning to students, if teachers are a means of production in the social production of labor powers, then students are, again, not great. Students are raw materials, right? They're raw materials because what is being produced, labor power, is in part of the body of the student, the bodiliness of the student. And students are processed as they work through the education system in this light. There's a form of what I've called primitive socialization going on. It's kind of the flip side of primitive accumulation, where students work through this process, but it's continual. I mean, if you're producing an instance of the general class of commodities, then on the whole, things remain pretty much the same. If you're producing bricks, for example, you get your clay and you put it in the press and so on. You heat it to a certain temperature, the brick comes. It's just repetitive. But with students, things ain't so repetitive as that. You get various cohorts of students going through the process, and labour power and the body that has that labour power is far more subject to change, antagonism than a brick. That makes such a big difference. And as there are ways that the state regulates teachers' work and teachers, there are again regulations regarding students too, especially within schools. So for most, I guess, nearly all countries throughout the world, there's a period of compulsory schooling. Students have to go to school, and that's really crucial, because what's that going on there is there. If schools are producing labour power, are involved in that, then students in schools, it's a forced process. It's a compulsory process for them. They can't get out of it. So in the UK, for example, there's a whole raft of laws against parents not sending their children to school, which, you know, so it's an oppressive and ultimately alienating process because of that from the student's point of view. When it comes to higher education, obviously the situation's different, because higher education, you can choose to go to university or not. But there again, there are ways of controlling both the labour of students and staff in higher education, which I'm not going into. Now, what I conclude from all of this stuff is that the pedagogical relation has been transfigured into the labour power production relation in this paper. What I've actually ended up with is a pedagogical relation as a labour power production relation. And I talk about that more in the paper, but I'll just say a little bit of it maybe. So teachers are entrusted by capital and its human representatives with enhancing the power of students, while depending upon the cooperativeness of the students in educational labour processes. Secondly, the relations between teachers and students are simultaneously antagonistic, as teachers are involved in developing students as raw materials, as labour power, with a background of oppressive state regulation, and as relations that can potentially have positive consequences for recruitment, wages, labour market positioning within the framework of capital for both teachers and students. Thus, it is a contradictory relation. It's a confusing relation for teachers and for students as well. And that can be sensed consciously. And I could give lots of examples of how that works out in practice, but I won't. The whole situation's intensified by the insertion of money as capital. So in part 4 of the paper, I talk about the monetization of education and what effect that has on the social production of labour power. And if you recall, Marx, in his famous sausage factory example in Capital, he gives a scenario where schools produce value. Now, a lot of people don't want to see this. I mean, lots of people have told me I must be wrong. Schools don't produce value. That's impossible. How? They're schools. I mean, come on. So I've had lots of struggles over the last 40 years in actually getting people to see that if certain conditions apply, value will be produced. In the theories of surplus value, Marx says that production of value doesn't depend on the commodity being a hard commodity, a commodity that you can drop on your foot or you can see. So he talks about transport. He talks about drama performances as value producing scenarios. You know, what's the commodity? Well, that might be a bit of a problem because you can't see it, but nevertheless there is a commodity there. Now what happens with the insertion of money into the system, I previously assumed in what I've said before that the state provides the money for education, state revenue, that the money, that the funding that for education comes out of state revenue. Now let's look at a different scenario where the money for education comes directly as capital. It's paid to education producers in the form of capital. Now, this does go on in England, for example, to a greater extent than in many countries, as we have a private school system of 6 to 7% of people go to private schools. But in some countries in Asia, Southeast Asia, the percentage that go to private schools, in some countries in Latin America is much higher. And so these factors are more important. Marx argues that where capital is exchanged against capital rather than state revenue, then that is an advanced form of capitalism. I mean, it sounds weird in a way that private schooling is more advanced for Marx than states, where the money for state schooling comes out of, state revenue raised by taxes and so on. But that's what he thinks, because it's a pure form of capitalism, or pure form of capital accumulation, put it that way. So in the paper, I look at capitalization in general, how the money form comes into education, and the capitalization of education in particular. But I won't go into that in detail. It's quite tricky. It's probably best if you look at the paper. Coming on to the last bit, I'm missing huge chunks out of it here. Part 5, the conclusion. It seems to me that the form of pedagogy and the form of capitalist education that I've tried to get across is kind of a haunting. It has a ghostly existence, but unlike most ghosts, it has a certain reality to it. It's becoming real, and I've looked at the development of education policy in England over the last 30 years in some depth, and what do I see? I see the social production of labour power becoming a greater reality, gaining strength, and certainly in higher education in the UK, the higher education is not fully capitalized, but it's moving in the direction of being a fully capitalist entity. And education policy is most useful. If you actually look at education policy reports, maybe in your own country, you can maybe see this, that over time, over a period of time, the strength of capital in terms of how it's in social intentionality, what people actually want to do with it, the strength of capital increases over time in these reports and policy intentions. So what I call the real haunting is a haunting by capital education institutions. Is a haunting of the real by its inner real. The inner real of education as we know it is this capitalist social form I've tried to describe in the paper, which is seen to be gaining strength. It's not an easy thing to combat or to even think about to some extent, but strength is all. The strength of this movement is all. We can resist it, but in my view, what we need to do is to devise not just non-capitalist forms, anti-capitalist forms, and alternative capitalist forms of education and training in society. My friend Mike Neary was very, very involved in developing these forms. Where is it? In this book, Student as Producer, How Do Revolutionary Teachers Teach? And he was involved with a bunch of people who were trying to develop cooperative universities. Unfortunately, he died a couple of years ago, so that initiative is not fallen by the way, but it's lost a certain dynamism. And the other thing was that if Jeremy Corbyn had won the election, had won the general election, Jeremy Corbyn was very in the Labour Party, when he was Labour Party leader, was very keen on developing cooperative universities. That didn't happen either, so he never became Prime Minister in this country. So what I'd like to end with is two or three points. So the kind of critique that I've given involves a couple of things that I'd like to warn against. First, the capitalization of education involves the capitalization of the human. I mean, people talk about human capital. It's a terrible, frightening concept. What does it mean? Actually, if you think about it, human capital is the capitalization of humanity and the humanization of or the humanization of capital. Both ain't great, but the first one is particularly awful, the capitalization of humanity. Human capital in that light, therefore, is horrific. It's a form of horror. And secondly, I'd like to say in conclusion that the critique of the capitalization of education institutions involves the critique of the general class of commodity forms and their growing intensity in education. So the general class of commodity is all of those commodities apart from labor power. Labor power has its own special place in our society. All the other forms are subject to a slightly different way of development because they're not human. There is a problem with that with animal labor and the rights of animals, which I won't deal with now. They kind of animals can be commodities, but they can also be forms of labor as well. They can also be labor power. I won't deal with that. So what I'd like to say is that this paper as a whole is a capitalist pedagogic horror story. It's a warning. Will be heeded? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure after all these years talking about this stuff. I really don't. Perhaps not. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, Glenn, thanks for sharing this fruitful information and the paper with us. I will just ask our attendees, participants, if they have any questions or not, and then we can finish the session. Evet, sevgili katılımcılarımız, Glenn hocamıza sorularımız varsa alabiliriz, yoksa oturumu sonlandıracağız.
I have a question.
Buyurun Eser hocam.
I wonder, like, what you think about the base and superstructure, or like Marxist theory, like in terms of education. Like, is this again, like in this sense, like reductionist? Like, can we approach this pedagogy or education system or education institutions from this reductionist, or can you follow like another approach? I just want to ask this question actually.
I don't tend to use the base superstructure model at all. I decided some years ago that I wasn't going to go down that route because despite what many people might say, especially followers of Althusser, people like that, structuralists and so on, it does create insoluble problems. But not only that, that's not the main issue. Maybe I'll backtrack a bit. What are these problems? The problem is, if you had that kind of structuralism, you need to say how the two relate. And there's been lots of sophistry, maybe, and obfuscation and waffling and so on, how that happens. So I've kind of left that alone. What I tend to look at are processes as structures. Now, Moish Bestone in Time, Labour and Social Domination does something like that. So if I look at labour power, for example, okay, look at its social production, and then the next bit of the process is how labour power is transformed into actual labour, which again transforms raw materials and mean production into the commodity, and the commodity is transformed into various categories and forms of value, which go rippling off. One of the interesting things about Marx is that when he was young, he wrote poetry, and he wrote a poem about Ovid, the guy who wrote Metamorphoses, the Roman poet. Ovid is all about transformation. It's all about gods becoming swans and people changing their forms. And Marx was interested in this at a very young age. So I see things in terms of processes and transformations. But also the other thing that I get from Marx, and no one really comments on this, is the notion of aspects, that phenomena can have aspects. I don't mean, as with Wittgenstein, that you see it's not a process of visuality, of base visuality, of seeing different parts of something, but it's a way of aspects, is a way of thinking about something. So, for example, with labour, Marx has the use value aspect and the value aspect, but there's only one form of labour going on. It's not that when I go to work, I do a bit of value production and then I do a little bit of use value production. It doesn't happen like that. So the one and same twofold nature of labour has these two aspects. So processes, transformations, aspects, I find these kind of ideas more useful, especially when you're talking about education, than the old base superstructure thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I really understand. Yeah, not much better now. Like, rather than structure, you based on more aspects, transformation, and processes. Yeah. Yeah, thanks a lot, really.
Glenn, one of our participants asked for the share the book titles that you suggested again.
Oh,
could you
right.
please share the book titles again, books?
Yes, I'm an idiot. I bought this book and it's like £75. It's in hardback, but now it's in paperback. Anyway,
okay. Okay.
This book is
Labor
by
Power.
Roberto Ciccarelli, Italian
Okay.
guy. Roberto, I'll leave it there for a few seconds. It is the best book on labour power. Roberto Ciccarelli. You got that? And the title is Labour Power. Well, gone the wrong way. Labour Power, Virtual and Actual in Digital Production. Labour Power, Virtual and Actual in Digital Production. That is, especially those speakers at the conference who have been talking about AI and anything to do with computers and digitalization, they'll find this particularly helpful. What this book does, it looks at labour power through Spinoza as well as Marx. So no, you don't have to do that. I mean, I've only looked really through Marx, and to a certain extent through people like John Holloway, but you didn't even really need him. There's enough in Marx to give you what I've actually said today, if you have to look around a bit. The other book I mentioned was this book by Mike Neary, student as producer. How do revolutionary teachers teach? And it's published by Zero Books. It's quite a good price, that. But if you look at other work by Mike Neary, you'll find there's lots of stuff by Mike Neary on the internet in various ways. And there's going to be a book coming out very soon, I think, probably in a couple of months' time, on the work and life of Mike Neary. And I gave a contribution to that book.
Okay, thanks a lot. I will just give some details of your paper, just the title and how the participants can find it in academia, okay? Sevgili katılımcılarımız, Dr. Glenn RIKOWSKI tarafından sunumu yapılan paper'ı, yani çalışması akademiyaya yüklemiş hocamız. Oradan detaylı olarak incelemek isteyen hocalarımız indirebilirler. Bilginiz olsun. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Thanks for your presentation, Glenn.
Thank you.
Okay, we will just finish this session. Okay, see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, really.
Yeah,
Thanks
a
a lot.
lot.
It was great.
Sayın hocalarımıza teşekkürlerimizi sunuyoruz. Kongremiz sözel bildiri oturumlarıyla devam edecek, ancak bu linkten devam etmiyoruz. Programda yer alan linkten bağlanabilirsiniz.